Edward awoke early, feeling a knot of anxiety in his stomach. His thoughts flitted between the day ahead and the imminent return of his wife, Emily. Her business trip had stretched on for weeks, leaving the house feeling strangely empty. He'd made an effort to prepare for her arrival. Coffee brewed, living room tidy, her favorite throw draped over the armchair. When the door finally opened, there she stood, bathed in the soft morning light filtering through the hallway windows. Her smile, though tinged with fatigue, was warm and welcoming. He instinctively embraced her. "Welcome home, Emily," he murmured, holding her close. "It's good to be back," she replied softly, her head resting against his shoulder. After a moment, she pulled away slightly, reaching into her bag. She produced a small, white stick. "I have some news," she announced, a gentle smile spreading across her face. "I'm pregnant, Edward." Edward froze, the words and the object in her hand taking a moment to register. A wave of surprised elation washed over him. "Emily, are you serious? Wow!" He grasped her hand, holding it tightly as he tried to absorb the news. Emily nodded, laughing as she brushed away a tear. "Yes, we're going to be parents. Isn't that wonderful?" She gave him a quick kiss and squeezed his hand. Despite the surge of happiness, a sliver of doubt pricked at Edward. Their relationship had felt strained lately, especially before her trip. He hesitated, then voiced his concern quietly. Emily laughed it off, attributing it to odd timing and promising a doctor's appointment to confirm. Edward nodded, reassured yet still slightly uneasy. He grabbed his coat and briefcase, heading off to work. Emily's news lingered in his mind. Despite her reassurances, the subtle doubt remained. By the time he reached the office, he could barely concentrate. Contracts and emails faded into the background, replaced by memories of how he and Emily had met. 5 years had passed since Emily entered his life. He remembered the night vividly. It was a company celebration, marking his promotion to senior manager. The room buzzed with conversation. He felt a surge of pride. That's when he saw her, across the room, laughing with Aaron Reed, a colleague. Aaron, as ambitious as Edward, was known for his arrogance and tendency to claim credit for others' work. Their relationship was marked by a quiet rivalry, a mutual respect for each other's abilities tinged with competition. That night, Aaron's behavior was typical. Loud laughter, possessive arm around Emily. Edward watched as Aaron leaned in, as if staking a claim. Aaron had a knack for turning everything into a contest, but Edward wasn't one to back down. Determined, Edward approached Emily and initiated a conversation. Soon they were laughing and talking easily, while Aaron hovered nearby, his impatience evident. Emily was intelligent, engaging, and effortlessly charming. Edward found himself drawn to her. As the night wore on, Aaron's arrogance intensified, his boasts about his ambitious and frankly unbelievable future plans becoming increasingly tiresome. Edward saw Emily's interest wane. When Aaron excused himself to network, Edward seized the opportunity, offering to get Emily a drink. She smiled, visibly relieved. From that point forward, their connection deepened. They exchanged numbers. A coffee date led to dinners, long conversations, weekends exploring the city, and quiet evenings at Edward's apartment. For the first time, Edward felt truly connected to someone. Emily was thoughtful and kind, making him feel seen and understood. He felt like he'd finally found a place where he belonged. A year into their relationship, Edward knew he couldn't wait any longer. They were walking along the beach, the moonlight shimmering on the water. The words felt simple, yet profound. He took her hand, looked into her eyes, and asked her to marry him. She said yes, her smile radiant. In that moment, he knew they were meant to be. Edward purchased a small house near the ocean, cozy and comfortable. They spent hours transforming it into their home, choosing furniture, paint colors, making it their own. They'd sit on the back porch, watching the waves, sharing their hopes and worries. They built a life together, filled with love and laughter. There were occasional disagreements, chores, late nights at work, even the arrangement of the kitchen, but they always found their way back to each other. Edward cherished those moments, the happy ones, and even the challenging ones. He could still see Emily's smile, hear her laugh, feel her hand in his. Now, with the news of the baby, He wondered if they were embarking on a new chapter. Yet, that lingering doubt resurfaced. Was Emily being entirely truthful with him? Something about the timing of the pregnancy felt off. Despite his reservations, Edward pushed the doubts aside. He loved Emily and wanted to believe her. By the time he arrived home that evening, he'd managed to quell his concerns, deciding that trust was paramount. He opened the door to the soft glow of candlelight and the aroma of Emily's cooking. She'd prepared a romantic dinner, wine for him, sparkling water for her, and all their favorite dishes. They laughed, shared stories about their day, and for a while, everything felt normal. Emily seemed happier than ever, radiating excitement. After dinner, Emily took his hand, a playful smile on her face, and suggested they retire upstairs. He hesitated briefly, mentioning the pregnancy. She reassured him with a warm laugh. "Oh, Edward," she said. "I already checked with the doctor. He said it's perfectly safe." That night they went to bed, and Edward did his best to suppress his lingering doubts. However, 2 days later, Emily returned from another doctor's appointment with news that unsettled him. "Edward, the doctor said I'm about 4 weeks along," she announced, sharing the update with a smile. Edward quickly calculated the timeline. He was certain they hadn't been intimate 4 weeks ago. He cautiously raised the issue, but Emily dismissed it, insisting he'd simply forgotten. Her explanation felt too smooth, almost rehearsed. Edward nodded, feigning agreement, but inwardly, his suspicion grew. As the days passed, his doubts intensified, weighing on him constantly. Then, something else happened that deepened his unease. Edward developed an uncomfortable irritation in his groin, a symptom that progressively worsened. Concerned, he decided to see a doctor without informing Emily. After undergoing some tests, hoping for a simple explanation, the results came back. He had contracted an STD. The news hit him hard. Everything he'd been trying to ignore snapped into sharp focus. His doubts transformed into something far more serious. The diagnosis gnawed at him, and he knew he could no longer ignore his suspicions. He needed answers. With Emily out for the morning, Edward saw an opportunity to check her belongings. He carefully opened her laptop, sifting through emails and documents related to her recent business trip. He wasn't prepared for what he found. After scrolling through countless emails, he stumbled upon an itinerary for her trip. His heart sank when he saw a familiar name: Aaron Reed. He hadn't realized Aaron was still in the same industry. Aaron had left Edward's company over a year ago, fading from Edward's thoughts. Yet, there it was. Aaron's name listed alongside Emily's, both part of the team for a business exhibition. Aaron wasn't just at the same event. He was now a colleague. The realization hit Edward like a thunderbolt. The rivalry, the arrogance, the way Aaron had hovered around Emily at that party years ago, it all came rushing back. He couldn't shake the feeling that Aaron might see this as a chance for revenge. After all, it had been clear that Emily's attention had shifted to Edward that night, and Aaron hadn't taken it well. Could Aaron be using his renewed connection with Emily to settle an old score? Or worse, had they rekindled something during her trip? As these thoughts swirled, the pieces began to fall into place. While he lacked concrete proof, a disturbing picture of betrayal was emerging. The idea that Emily might have fallen for Aaron and was conspiring against him haunted Edward. He imagined them together, whispering, mocking him, plotting to take everything he'd worked for. The most painful part wasn't just the betrayal itself, but the thought of Emily making him look like a fool. If she had a child with Aaron and passed it off as his, she could secure alimony and potentially claim a significant portion of his assets. The more he considered it, the more he realized he couldn't remain passive. He needed to protect himself. Edward acted swiftly. Within days, he consulted a lawyer and a financial advisor. He explained everything: Emily's suspicious behavior, her possible connection with Aaron, and the pregnancy. The lawyer, a sharp-minded woman named Matilda, immediately outlined a strategy to protect his finances and property. First, Matilda suggested establishing a new trust fund to hold his most valuable assets: the house, retirement fund, and stock portfolio. Legally, the trust would own these assets for the benefit of future heirs or specific family members, placing them beyond Emily's reach in a divorce settlement. Edward would serve as trustee, not owner. Next, his financial advisor recommended transferring his savings to offshore accounts in jurisdictions with strict privacy laws. This would shield his money from potential legal claims. The advisor also suggested converting some savings into physical assets like gold and collectibles, stored in private vaults. These assets, not linked to his name on paper, would be difficult to trace. They also agreed that Edward should take out a loan against the house, depositing the funds into a secured account held by his lawyer's firm. This debt would effectively reduce the house's value, making it a less attractive target in a divorce settlement. Finally, Matilda advised Edward to meticulously document everything: his interactions with Emily, her suspicious behavior, and any evidence related to Aaron. If the situation escalated to court, he would need proof of Emily's deception. Over the next week, Edward quietly implemented these plans. He moved his savings, transferred the house into the trust, and secured his assets piece by piece. He was careful not to arouse suspicion, maintaining a light-hearted demeanor with Emily and acting as if everything were normal. Edward knew he needed more than just financial protection. He needed concrete evidence. He hired a private investigator, a quiet and meticulous man named David, to track Emily's movements and confirm his suspicions about Aaron. Emily and Aaron were cautious, avoiding overt displays of affection or spending excessive time together in public. However, David managed to capture a few telling moments: a lingering glance, a private lunch, an evening spent in a secluded cafe. In the photos and videos, Emily and Aaron leaned in close, their expressions betraying an undeniable intimacy. It wasn't definitive proof, but it could be useful in court. Their meetings didn't resemble professional colleagues. They looked like two people sharing something much deeper. Edward didn't give David much more time to gather evidence. He felt ready and couldn't bear the waiting any longer. With everything in place, Edward met with Matilda to finalize the divorce papers. Matilda ensured the paperwork protected his assets as planned, leaving Emily with far less than she might have anticipated. Once the papers were ready, Edward quietly packed his essentials, leaving behind the life he had built with Emily. Without a word, he left town, relocating to a distant part of the country where Emily couldn't easily find him. He checked into a quiet hotel, letting the days pass in solitude, knowing that Emily would eventually return to an empty house. When Emily returned from her 3-day trip, she found the house silent and deserted. Initially, she assumed Edward was working late or out with friends. Then she noticed the envelope on the kitchen counter. Her hands trembled as she opened it, finding only the divorce papers, stamped and signed. Nothing else. She stood frozen, staring at the papers in disbelief, unable to comprehend how everything had unraveled so quickly. Emily desperately tried to contact Edward. She called his old number, but it was disconnected. She searched for him on social media, only to find his accounts deactivated. She reached out to their mutual friends, but no one knew his whereabouts. It was as if Edward had vanished without a trace, leaving her with nothing but the harsh reality of the divorce. Meanwhile, Edward sat alone in his hotel room, the weight of his experiences settling heavily upon him. The betrayal, the broken trust, and the doubts he had suppressed for so long were now undeniable. The stress, sleepless nights, and loneliness took their toll. He knew he needed to escape, to find a quiet place to clear his mind. After some searching, he found a small cabin in the woods, isolated and surrounded by nature. It was the perfect sanctuary for solitude and reflection. There, in the peace of the cabin, Edward hoped to find some clarity. He quit his job, unable to bear the thought of the office or the memories of Emily and Aaron's betrayal. The cabin offered him a space to be alone with his thoughts, away from everything that had once defined his life. When the divorce proceedings began, Edward didn't attend in person. He communicated with Matilda via video conference, appearing only if the judge required it. Matilda handled the majority of the legal proceedings. Emily, on the other hand, arrived at court unprepared, expecting a favorable outcome. However, Edward's careful planning had paid off. His assets, secured in the trust fund, offshore accounts, and the reduced value of the house were inaccessible to her. All she had were the divorce papers and mounting frustration. Emily was furious, but her options were limited. Her only remaining leverage was her pregnancy, which she attempted to use to garner sympathy and sway the outcome. However, Edward was prepared. Matilda presented his medical records, revealing his STD diagnosis, which Emily couldn't deny. Alongside this, the photos and videos of Emily with Aaron were submitted as evidence of infidelity. Emily's strategy crumbled. She had entered the courtroom expecting to control the narrative, but she left with nothing. Meanwhile, Edward began a new life far away, seeking peace in nature. He embraced solo camping, mountain climbing, and documenting his adventures through videography. He started a blog, sharing his journeys with an online community. His new hobby brought him calm and a sense of purpose. His videos gained a following, providing a steady income. He even got a dog, a loyal companion who accompanied him everywhere, a friend he knew would never betray him. One evening, while reading comments on his latest video, Edward paused. A comment from a woman caught his eye. "I recognized you. I apologize for everything that happened. I was wrong. Please forgive me. I'm sorry for reaching out this way, but I have no other way to contact you. Just know that I deeply regret it." Edward didn't need a name to recognize Emily. She'd found his blog, either by chance or through searching. Her words evoked a mix of nostalgia and relief. While the pain lingered, he no longer felt anger. He'd found peace in his new life. After a moment's reflection, Edward replied, "I do not hold a grudge. God will judge us. Live happily." He clicked send, closed his laptop, and felt a sense of closure. He'd made peace with his past and was free from bitterness, looking ahead with hope. 2 years passed. Emily managed to rebuild her life, relying heavily on the support of her family. Her parents and siblings provided invaluable emotional and practical assistance, helping her navigate the challenges of single motherhood. Despite their unwavering support, Emily often felt a deep sense of emptiness. She attempted to move on, even considering dating again, but each attempt fizzled out. Men didn't stick around, and even Aaron had vanished from her life, only sending the mandated child support payments each month. Her days were filled with a gnawing loneliness, and her nights were worse, haunted by memories of her mistakes and a profound regret. She spent countless hours thinking about Edward, wondering how he was doing and how things might have been different if she hadn't made those fateful choices. Guilt weighed heavily on her conscience, a constant reminder of the life she had lost. Meanwhile, Aaron's life had taken a drastic and devastating turn. After months of reckless behavior, he found himself in a hospital bed, barely conscious and in excruciating pain. It began when the husband of one of the women he had infected with HIV tracked him down. Consumed by fury and heartbreak, the man confronted Aaron one evening as he returned home. The confrontation escalated quickly. The enraged husband attacked Aaron with a baseball bat, beating him nearly to death. Then, taking a knife from his pocket, he mutilated Aaron, severing his genitals. He then took the severed parts and fed them to a stray dog in front of a horrified and helpless Aaron. Police discovered Aaron barely alive and rushed him to the hospital. He suffered multiple broken bones and permanent injuries that would prevent him from ever walking properly again. The husband's brutal act ensured that Aaron would never be able to have sex again, a consequence that deeply impacted him. Aaron's troubles didn't end there. 3 women he had infected with HIV, along with their husbands, filed lawsuits against him, demanding compensation for the immense pain and suffering he had caused. The women's marriages crumbled as their husbands struggled to cope with the devastating news of the disease. Divorce proceedings began, leaving everyone involved in emotional turmoil. Emily learned about Aaron's fate from the news. She had been waiting for his child support payment, which was overdue. When she contacted him, he finally confessed his situation. Emily sat in stunned silence, processing the story. "Karma has strange ways of working," she murmured to herself. Aaron had inflicted so much pain, and now it seemed he was facing the consequences of his actions. Aaron's recklessness had ruined countless lives, including her own. He was now paying the price for his choices. Emily didn't feel joy at his misfortune, but she couldn't deny a sense of justice. As she reflected on everything, she knew she couldn't change the past, but she could focus on her son and rebuild her life. Aaron had lost everything, his health, his reputation, and his future. In contrast, Edward had found a new life far away from the shadows of his past. He had found solace and fulfillment in nature, spending his days hiking, camping, and capturing his adventures on video. He started a blog, sharing his journeys with an online community, and his videos quickly gained a following, providing a modest but steady income. He even got a dog, a loyal companion who accompanied him everywhere, a friend he knew would never betray him. One evening, while reading comments under one of his recent videos, Edward paused. A comment from a woman caught his attention. It read, "I recognized you. I apologize for everything that happened. I was wrong. Please forgive me. I'm sorry for reaching out this way, but I have no other way to contact you. Just know that I deeply regret it." Edward didn't need a name to know who had written it. Emily had found his blog, either by chance or through a deliberate search. Her words stirred a complex mix of nostalgia and relief within him. While the pain she had caused still lingered, he no longer felt anger. He had found peace in his new life. After a brief pause, Edward responded to her comment. "I do not hold a grudge. God will judge us. Live happily." He clicked send, then closed his laptop, feeling a sense of closure. He had made peace with his past and was free from the bitterness that had once consumed him. He looked ahead with hope, embracing the future with a renewed sense of purpose. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.